Yeah, well, one of the things that's really struck me as incomprehensible about the carbon debate is, so I know, for example, that over the last 30 years, something like that, the planet has greened quite radically, especially in semi-arid areas. And that seems to be a consequence of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, some of which is arguably human-made. But the net consequence of that, it's so interesting to see, is immense greening.
Sure.
It's something like 20% of the Earth's area, which is like, that's a lot. And the fact that it's in semi-arid areas means that exactly the desert-like areas that were supposed to expand, according to the climate doomsayers, have actually shrunk. And I've been thinking that through. Again, more recently, I talked to Patrick Moore, for example, and he was one of the founders of Greenpeace. And
Right.
Moore has produced these, he's not the only one, but he's produced these graphs of carbon dioxide levels across like 500 million years instead of 250.
Right.
And we're definitely at a carbon dioxide low.
Yeah.
And so if we tap it up even a little bit, it makes a big difference. But that's all to say that plants like carbon dioxide a lot.
They do.
And then when there's more of it, they grow and sequester it, and they do that rapidly. And then I read a paper here recently that indicated that the typical climate model underestimates the rapidity at which plants utilize carbon dioxide by 30%, which is like a fairly large margin of error. And so it just seems to me to be self-evident that if we set the preconditions, plants would mop up any excess carbon dioxide in like no time flat. And so you're saying that if we improved even our grazing habits so that grass was allowed to grow longer before it was grazed on, you don't need much of a percentage in how effective the plants sequester carbon to take whatever excess carbon there is.
That's exactly right. And as pastures, as perennials, and of course, you know, a lot of North America was a prairie. Okay, that's a perennial prairie, as opposed to an annual, which is corn,
crops,
and soybeans, and annual crop. Okay, in a healthy perennial.
So you don't have to plant perennials; they just grow year after year.
That's right. That's right. So in a perennial prairie situation, pasture situation, if it's healthy, there's enough methanotrophic bacteria. This is a special kind of freestanding bacteria, methanotrophic bacteria, and like its name suggests, it's there to pull down methane. There's enough there to metabolize into the soil bank the methane released from 1,000 cows per acre. Well, you're never going to have 1,000 cows per acre. So
where do these ideas come from then? Given because we hear follow the science all the time, but then if you look into the science, first of all, there's a plethora of opinions, right, at minimum, and just now and then, you know, when you're looking at data, you kind of have to stand back and use your head a bit. And you start from maybe the presumption that any idea that large grazing herds are bad for the planet is to be regarded with extreme skepticism to begin with, because large grazing herds are exactly the sorts of things that the environmental types worship when they're happening naturally in Africa. So you can't have it both ways.
That's right.
And so I've just always thought the idea that pastured animals, properly pastured, being bad for the planet somehow, and that's as bad as equating factory farming with regenerative farming, for example, because they're not the same thing at all.
No,
okay, so your experience on the farm was that carefully managed grazing herds regenerated soil that, well, not even soil, they actually made rocky areas into soil that could then be, well, first of all, a carbon sink, if you care about such things, but also productive grazing land.
Yes.
And a big part of the trick there is to manage the grass properly and to move the cattle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we began adding the other species. So you've got the cattle, and so we look around. So Jordan, a lot of what developed here was in the mid '60s. Dad looked around and he said, "Well, 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer doesn't build soil. All right, what does build soil? What makes regeneration happen?" And it's very simple. You know, there is no animalless ecology, so you got to have animals. Well, what about these animals? Well, they move. Well, if they move, then we have to give them shelter, water, and control. And so all of our innovations that we're now, famous for, grew out of not, we didn't sit around in a focus group saying, how can we innovate? It was strictly, how does nature work? So how do we mimic that on a domestic scale? That was all. We don't have.
So you're basically mimicking migration.
Mimicking the choreography. We call this mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. And I knew you would enjoy that.
Yeah. Say that again.
And
That's quite nice.
I did practice that in front of a mirror.
Let's hear it again.
Mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration.
Oh yes, okay.
All right.
Well, that sounds plenty scientific.
Plenty scientific.
Yeah.
So then we say, how does this maintain sanitation? You got all this manure and urine and stuff, and birds follow herbivores. So we built egg mobiles for laying chickens, and they follow the cow herd. The chickens scratch through the cow pies, eat out the fly larvae, scratch the cow patties into the ground, stimulating the fertility, eating the grasshoppers and crickets that compete with the cows for the vegetation. And instead of where most farmers would shoot.
So the chickens chase the cows. Are they moved too?
Yes. So they're in egg mobiles. That's what we call them, egg mobiles.
Okay. So the chickens follow the cattle, and you move the chickens as well.
Yeah, so like the egret on the rhino's nose. I mean, look at any herd, wildebeest in nature, and you'll see these flocks of birds following, and they're the sanitizers with the herbivores. So instead of shooting the cows up with parasiticides and grubicides and things like that, we just collect $100,000 worth of eggs as a byproduct of the pasture sanitation program and the fertility program. So this then allows.
So why sanitation exactly? Delve into that a bit more, because while the cows are manuring the land as they graze, and the sanitation problem, it doesn't decompose rapidly enough without the birds. Like what exact role do the birds play?
I mean, there are dung beetles, but the sanitation is that the manure is what carries the cattle parasites. That's where the parasites live and propagate to reinfect the cows when they come back through. So when the cows scatter them, the sun and now not having enough of a pie to procreate in, to live in.
I see.
Then they don't live for another day.
Okay, so you move the cattle for two reasons then, actually. One is to allow the grass to maximize in terms of density, but also to allow the land to clean.
Yes.
So that when the cows come back, they're eating grass, right? Rather than their own waste products.
That's right.
And the chickens help with that, and then you collect the eggs. Okay, so now the problem comes down to essentially how do you move the cattle, right?
So we move the. We move the cows every day around 4 o'clock. We like the afternoon move best for a number of reasons. But it's electric fence, one strand of electric fence. Cows are very smart. They don't want to get shocked. And so we just go out and open a cross fence. So imagine a ladder with rungs. And so our permanent wires, our permanent fence is the stringers on the outside. Our portables are the rungs on the inside, and we can expand and contract those based on how big the herd is, how much grass there is, all sorts of factors as to how much we're going to give them.
So let's get an idea of let's say we have a field, and you want to move the cows. What do you have that's permanent, that's fencing exactly?
Well, the edges define like between the field and the forest, or the field and a creek, field and a pond. All right, so you
so that's permanently fenced off.
That's permanent.
Okay,
and then you simply run. You had a little reel, with poly wire on it, and you run that across from side to side, and that
demarcates
an area, and you're simply giving those cows a segment of that. We call it a paddock.
Yeah,
every day, and the beauty is that in no time, the cows respond to you coming. I mean, think about your dog or your cat. When you bang the dish, they come running. They know what that is. Well, the cows, when we go out to move them, roughly, we try to do it as close to 4 as possible. Mm-hmm. If you got called every day at 4 o'clock for a bowl of ice cream, about 3:45, your tail would wag and your ears would wiggle too. And so the cows are ready, and we go out and we just call them, "Come on, cows!" And they just come running through. We close behind them.
Why?
and we're
Why
done.
do they? Because they know the food will be better.
Because they've got a new salad bar.
Okay, so they've learned
They've got
that.
a new salad
They've
bar.
learned that.
Yeah,
And then
it
so-
doesn't take them long to learn that. They learn that very, very quickly. And so they just so you don't have to herd them. You don't.
Another
have to-
advantage to doing it at the same time every day because you establish a habit. with the
Animals
cows.
love routine. Animals love routine.
So do people, as it turns out.
Yes,
even
yes.
though they think they don't.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, we are creatures of routine. So so the moving them. But you have to understand.
So why do you need
were
the
saying,
fences
well,
at all
why-
then? Why do you need the fences at all? I mean, it stops them from going back. It stops.
It stops them from going into
And forward. Yeah, I see. Yes,
tomorrow's
that's a
dinner.
stupid
So
question. I
basically,
see why,
we're giving them 1 day's plate of menu every day.
Right.
One plateful. If somebody came and gave you, 5 platefuls of food for 5 days, you'd probably just pick out the good stuff and leave the stuff you didn't want, and you'd be a lot more
Right. So they have enough.
so
and
they,
eat
they have
efficiently
enough,
then.
yeah, and they actually change their behavior to eat more aggressive.